I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati.
All right. Welcome to the Women's Summit on Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. This panel is the Violence Against Women's panel. So I want to go ahead and let all the panelists introduce themselves first. So I'll go ahead and start at the top with Steph.
Hey, I'm Steph Zamorano. I have 20 years experience as an English high school teacher. And right now I'm one of the executive producers of the Jimmy Dore Show.
Awesome. Fee?
Hi, I'm Carol Isabella. I host the Combo Couch. I'm an independent journalist. And I'm excited to be here and discuss with these ladies all of these precarious issues that we're facing today.
Tara?
Hi, I'm Tara Reid, and I'm an author of a book called Left Out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In, and also the host of the podcast, The Politics of Survival with Tara Reid. And I was a domestic violence advocate as well as a survivor, and I'm really happy to be here with everybody.
Misty?
Hi, I'm Misty. I'm an activist and I host some shows, various shows. I'm excited to be here. This is an awesome panel. This is fire. So yeah, thanks for having me, Sabrina.
Nia?
Hi, I'm Nia Renee. I am a content creator, social media influencer, domestic violence survivor for How to Love a Battered Woman. And I'm very, very excited to be here.
And Christine?
Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Olivo. I am a congressional candidate in Florida. What district? I don't know because our governor is quite special, but I am here tonight to talk about violence against women. And I grew up in a household and I experienced it firsthand. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Awesome. So the first question, this one, I actually question this percentage because most women don't report these incidents. But the first question is worldwide, almost 1/3, which is 27% of women aged 15 to 49 years who have been in a relationship report that they have been subjected to some form of physical and or sexual violence by their intimate partner. That's coming from the World Health Organization. And the question I want to throw out to the panel is, why do you feel that women in these situations are less likely to report incidents of abuse? And so I'll go ahead and start with Steph.
You know, my response is that I feel that when people are faced with challenges and difficult situations, sometimes you're embarrassed to communicate what you're going through. You have a sense of inadequacy, and what will happen is you just won't talk about it. You don't want to confide even with a friend because you feel a sense of, what did I do that created this situation? And I think, embarrassment and the sense of inadequacy silences somebody. And, I've been fortunate that I've had healthy relationships. And I've been fortunate that in my family, my relationship with past boyfriends or anything like that, I was lucky. I felt very fortunate. And I would say that ultimately people just have they're lost and they feel trapped by circumstance. And I've had many friends. I had a friend in high school that she had been in situations where it was abusive. And she came from a very good family, a strong middle-class family, but she herself didn't have the sense of self. She didn't know how to set healthy boundaries. She didn't know what was acceptable or unacceptable. And I knew it in just such a simple manner that we were out and she was asked out by an older man, like 20 years older than her, for lunch. And she says, yes, I'm going to go have lunch with him tomorrow. And I'm like, why? And she said, well, he asked me. And I go, what? You could say no. And she didn't understand that she could say no. It was that simple. And I just felt that she was kind of this very vulnerable energy out there in the universe, and she didn't know how to advocate for herself. So is it that's where I land in my response. Thanks.
Fee?
I agree with what Steph said too. I mean, I have seen it. I used to work with a lot of domestic abused women who were also homeless. And one of the bigger elements of that is the fact that when you are so dependent on your partner for economic needs, or you can't hold your own economically because of the current economic situation that we're living in, it's really hard to step away. It becomes bigger than you, and you add to that, especially if you have children or if you have somebody that you have to provide for. And so you sometimes, a lot of these women would just be afraid to say anything, because then they wouldn't have a place to go, and then their children might get taken away, or they would have to fend for their children, or they and their children would be homeless or unhoused. And so that's poverty comes into that. And we've seen that throughout the pandemic too, where women have been forced to stay in lockdowns with abusive partners, because of also need and of the circumstances. And we've seen an uptick, not just in depression and in all these, mental ailments, but also in domestic violence throughout the pandemic. And so I think it's important to factor in economics when you're talking about why women are in troubled relationships. That is definitely, to me, a number one factor, especially looking at what feminism is for a lot of people in third world nations or in the global south. It means getting you out of poverty, getting women out of poverty, getting women to have, potable water, electricity, and all of these things. Whereas like a lot of that is viewed in the United States as more of like a symbolic type of, oh yes, women empowerment, but there's really not that much behind it. And so I think when we're talking about why women are in problematic relationships and why women don't find that equity here in anything, whether it's in their career or their relationships, we always have to factor in the economic need.
Good points. Tara?
Well, I would go further and say, let's flip the narrative. Why are there so many abusive men? And I think part of it is embedded in our culture. And there is also there are many barriers to getting out of abusive relationships. Economic, as it was mentioned earlier, which means couldn't even transportation. I think it was also mentioned about children. Children are often used as bargaining chips or pawns by the abuser in power and control type relationships. I mean, I think as US citizens, we're in an abusive relationship with our government right now. I would say I'd go a step further. So we're not having models of healthy, boundaried society and culture right now. I mean, I'm speaking as the person who was a staffer for US Senator Joe Biden at that time, who sexually assaulted me and then covered it up and used his resources to silence me. Now he's the president of the United States and one of the most powerful men in the world. So they didn't even just cover it up, but they lifted him up. And like Cuomo and like other powerful politicians, they're almost rewarded for their misogyny and for their abuse. So when you break it down to the working class and barriers, the other barriers that you have, like I had clients that had immigration issues where an abuser would hold their immigration status over their heads and it would keep them from coming forward or trying to get free. So this isn't about people choosing to stay in bad or troubled relationships or violent relationships. This is about lack of access to resources, as was said earlier, but also access to justice. There's none. And you've got statistics now where 3 out of 5 women are sexually assaulted in our country. You have the high statistic where more women than not are in violent relationships and controlling relationships. So when you have these startling statistics, we need to go to the core. And I would go further and say, this is men and women that are abused, but it's women predominantly that are, the misogyny and the way our culture is. And, I think that we have to educate our young men how to have healthy boundaries and not use power and control in their relationships. So that takes working with earlier education on looking for the signs of abusive relationships. And, I think we're very far away from figuring it out. I worked in the domestic violence field as an expert witness and as an advocate and with law enforcement and with grassroots agencies. And what I can tell you is that in all those years, the statistics didn't change. They got worse. So that means we're not figuring it out right. So we need to go back, recalibrate, and look at what we're doing as a culture and make it more of a holistic, community-based response rather than necessarily incarceration and that kind of thing. And those are my thoughts.
Misty?
Yeah, I think what everyone has already said has been, dead on. I think that there's so many reasons why women choose not to report. And it as Fee said, it really just, it comes down to like the capitalism aspect of it, where a lot of women find themselves in positions where they do have kids and they do have financial obligations and they have to worry about insurance and they have to worry about all of these things, or even, staying. I think it just really boils down to, like Tara was just saying, the culture of things. We have a very violent and exploitative culture. We have a culture that has always kind of treated women as second-class citizens. And I think that we need to really, it's going to take a lot of self-examination as a species. I don't even know if we're up for it, to be honest. I mean, I don't mean to be negative Nancy, but seriously, I think it's a lot. It's a lot to really take a look at and be reflective of as a society, why we're allowing this kind of an environment to permeate and get worse. I mean, if we're being honest, it should be getting better, and it feels like it may be getting worse. As we're seeing now with more war, that always affects women more. It's a whole thing. We're really going to have to take a look at ourselves as a species and figure out, how to move away from this whole environment of violence. I think we just have our society is built on violence and exploitation.
Nia?
You're muted, Nia.
Muted.
Whoops.
I do that all the time.
Just piggybacking on a lot of what the comments that have already been made already. And I saw an interesting comment that was brought up on the screen as well. I think one of the biggest reasons, at least that I've seen with how I run my brand and everything that I do is there's a lot of gaslighting that happens, and there's a lot of victim blaming that happens that makes if the public feels this way, if people we don't know on social media feels this way, then how the hell is the police or law enforcement going to believe us as well? And coming from, the criminal justice background, I have my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. My father was a probation officer working with DV survivors every single day, or DV cases every single day. It never really worked out in the victim's favor. And I think that's so devastating, because women have to work 30 times harder just to prove something that a man can easily just get away with. And it's just ridiculous that the victims are always being viewed as if we're the perpetrators instead of the other way. I get that it's proven or innocent until proven guilty, but it's usually innocent until innocent. And it's just, if there's a history of people being able to get away with things, then what's going to make us trust that, we're going to be heard the first time? So those are my thoughts.
Christine?
Yes. So my family's from Haiti, and culturally, you don't tell people about your business. You're supposed to keep it to yourself. And even me sharing this, I'm going to be very careful, because it was a loved one. I grew up in a household where my grandmother opened doors to all of our family members, and a loved one of mine, very near and dear to my heart, she was actually abused as a child. And so when she tried to get help as a child, she was blamed. And we're talking, 10, 11, 12 years old. She was blamed. And so now fast forward to being an adult, and now you're being abused. You, it was in her mind already that even if she says something, they're going to blame her anyway. So she just felt that there was no way out. No one was going to listen. No one was going to believe. And even within the culture, it's hush hush. You don't say anything. And culturally, I'm not just talking about, there's American culture, but when you have Caribbean culture, it's tough. It is very tough, and they will call you every name in the book. I mean, even when she tried to report her abuse as a child at 11 years old, she was called a whore. So that stays with you. And then you grow up and you think they're just going to call me names. They're going to blame me, and at the end of the day, no one's going to do anything anyway. So I just say that from that point of view of just knowing her and being able to speak to her on a regular basis and just hear the stories, I know that that's why she didn't say anything.
Well said. For those who don't know, there are over 200,000 unopened rape kits in police stations in the United States. So oftentimes I've heard people say, well, why don't they just report it? It's not that simple. Just because you report it doesn't mean that there's something that's going to be done about it. It doesn't mean that the person who assaulted you is going to be held accountable, especially based on the stat I just gave you. So I think that's important for people to know. And also, sometimes I would hear people say that, well, if you're in an abusive relationship, why don't you just leave? And I think some of the things that you just heard on the panel show you there's economics here at play. It's not as always as easy to leave. There's a show, I think, if you haven't seen it, I recommend that you watch. It's called The Maid, and it's on Netflix. And it shows you the story of a woman who she's a mother who tries to get out of that situation. And it shows you all the steps that she goes through. She goes to the police, like she does the right things that you're supposed to do. And because she doesn't have the economic means, she just keeps hitting a brick wall one after another. So it's difficult to watch, but I think it highlights the poverty situation that we have in this country and how it's even worse for women if you are in that situation. But that brings me to my second question. Why do you feel some women in abusive relationships don't leave those relationships, or they will leave, but they will go back? And I'll go back up to Steph.
Oh, I think, first off, we know that it's economics. We know that if you have children and that, look at the economy right now. Look how much everything is costing right now. Look in the past 2 years how people lost their jobs, lost their access to healthcare, losing their apartments, losing their homes. In these dire situations, you don't want to rip your family apart. I mean, you're thinking, oh, like if I'm in a relationship that has domestic violence in it and I have 2 children, I'm going to reconsider escaping this relationship. And also, I think, come on, we all want to see somebody get better. So if you're in a relationship and you're walking away from that relationship and your spouse says, I will do better, I promise to do better, if you ever loved that person, you want to hear that. You want to hear that, and you want to believe them that they are actually going to make amends and take care of you. I just want to bring up a key point. So that's why I think some people stay in these relationships, the economics of it. I hope that they're going to work out. I would also go back to the idea of parenting. Sabby, you're sharing the statistics with us, and Tara, you're sharing those, information with us. And it's like, well, all of these young men have been raised by women. Women have been in their life. So what are we doing in the context of parenting? How are we modeling healthy dynamics? And that's like there's no parenting has been around forever. And people are still lost about how to parent, how to set healthy boundaries for your kids, how to show the right kind of tone when you're arguing with your spouse in front. I never saw my parents argue for years because their arguments were like a separate thing. They would remove the children from the situation and they would have their conversations. But what I think parenting is going to play such a key role for our young boys and for our young girls, and to teach them to behave honorably and respectfully. And I think that I think we could create a culture of caring. I think there are those opportunities. But when I hear women having to escape abuse, I don't think there are enough safety nets for the most vulnerable among us.
Well said. Fee?
If you look at the entirety of the American existence, the American culture, and I'm going to look at it from a macro perspective now. You look at how this country is operating. It's heavily pro military. It's heavily pro war. It's heavily capitalistic. It's putting up, this idea that you have to have money and profit and be like a strong woman and like, a bad bitch and like own all this stuff. And like it's almost that sort of thing is good, but when it's at there's an element to it that is like it kind of prevents women from showing any weakness. And like people are afraid, women are afraid of looking weak, especially if you're like a strong, capable woman that's out there and that has a career and all of this, to admit a failure in a relationship and to admit that you were not smart enough to not get in this relationship. It really does something to your psyche. It really does something to like who you are as a person. You start having self-doubt and you start thinking, maybe I'm not as capable as I thought I was. Maybe, the insecurities start creeping in. And so I think that society has prepped us to not really be in tune with our emotions in a healthy way, to not be in tune with our intuition and have that understanding that it's okay to admit defeat and to be wrong on something, especially a relationship. And so I think that's why also there is a hesitancy and there's sometimes an attempt to go back to what is comfortable, because in spite of what might be toxic, it's what and it's what's comfortable. And it's how society has operated to the point where you're so busy trying to work or trying to succeed or trying to keep up appearances that you aren't really stopping to assess where you are in this moment. And I 100% think that's as everybody has said, is part of the culture, is part of the way this country does things. But like I said, I go back to economics and I go back to how it's very easy to say somebody should just leave, but when there are a lot of elements at play and a lot of people might be in the process might get hurt, like your children or whatever medical benefits you may have or whatever things you have built up. It's always this idea of starting over, like of having to start over. Can I do it alone? Am I enough? Am I going to be capable of doing this? It's all of those self-doubt, and a lot of this of society pushes that doubt onto us a lot through the marketing, through the propaganda. And it's something to look at too, the massive propaganda that is extremely, in a way it's sexual liberation, but it also in a way it's like, but also you're still going to be looked at a certain way.
Tara?
Well, I'll fall back on, as an advocate, they told us, and reading the statistics, a person in an abusive relationship might go back up to 7 times or more. And it's because of all the previous barriers we mentioned, economic, cultural, and religious. We didn't really touch on that, but there's this motive of shame and fear. Also, I want to talk about cognitive dissonance. For instance, in my particular case, working for Joe Biden, He's the author of the Violence Against Women Act. He was my boss at the time. That was starting to happen right at the time. And they were discussing it in the office. At the time, I was experiencing him sexually harass and then assault me. So imagine that cognitive dissonance. And also there's the cognitive dissonance for a battered woman. This is someone you love. This is someone you made a vow with, if it's a husband or a partner, right? And so it's hard to accept that the person that you trust and you love wants to harm you and destroy you. It is very hard to accept that, particularly if children are involved in that relationship, because then you have societal pressures wanting you to say, oh, we need both parents involved. And you as a parent want co-parenting. You want your child to experience both a mother and a father. You want that naturally, right? But what we don't want is abuse. So besides all the obvious barriers of maybe even just transportation to leave physically and the economic of where to go, there's also, battered women that would tell me over and over again that that because there was not an adequate response, they were fearful to leave. They were fearful of the threats. So when I had cases that were on the stand where they would call them flipping on the stand, where they would not testify against the abuser and shut down. It's because they felt the abuser had more power than even law enforcement, and that the case wouldn't be successful and they'd be facing consequences from their abuser. And that fear is real. So fear and abuse are, quite the motivators to have you stuck and in a relationship. And then when you get a little more into it, Stockholm syndrome is a whole other deal. And what that means, basically, in a nutshell, is you start to identify with the person abusing you so much that you see their point of view. In the land of many things are true at once. So you start to take on and empathize, but almost become part of that, process of imprisoning yourself. So it's a psychological trap as well as a physical one. It's not simple. And, what I would say is that if you know someone who's in a relationship that's abusive, the best thing you can do is be present for them, to keep offering those resources, but don't pull away your support and your ear because you're impatient, because they keep going back. And also we haven't touched on substance abuse issues. Those are huge. And in my family, both my parents had those, and there was an abusive, they had an abusive relationship. So I saw physical and heard psychological abuse. I didn't have modeling for boundaries, so to speak, as a young person, of what that would look like, of what a man would look like who would honor a woman's boundaries. I saw my father get very violent. So, if that's normalized, and which we've normalized it as a culture, then of course it's being perpetuated in intimate partner relationships.
Well said. Misty?
So I want to touch on something that I think that Tara said, touched on briefly there. I think that we need to release, because I feel like there's a lot, there tends to be a lot of victim blaming in these situations where women stay or where they go back. And I think that people really need to examine the psychological aspect of what abuse is. It doesn't start physical. The mental starts first. They tear you down as a person, generally speaking. This is generally speaking, but there's a cycle. Like there's a process in which they tear you down. They isolate you from your friends and family. They create this sort of environment of isolation, and then you don't have anywhere to go. You don't have any more friends or family. You don't have anybody that you can talk to. You've been isolated. You've been torn down as a person. Your self-esteem is gone. You feel there's a lot of, nobody else wants you. You're stupid. You're fat. You're ugly. There's a whole process of tearing you down as a person, so that you're left with very little self-worth, self-esteem. You don't feel like you have the power or control to, actually leave. Are you actually that brave? Of course you're not that brave. Are you actually that strong? Of course you're not. Your abuser has been telling you for whatever period of time that you're not. And so you start to believe that. You start to immerse yourself in that narrative. And I think that takes a lot of power away from women in those situations. And so I think before you victim blame, please try to remember that this person has been through a whole process of conditioning, to be in the situation. And really, I think we just need to create more of a system of support for women like that, and stop the victim blaming for sure. It's really kind of gross. It's one of the very few crimes where we start to blame the victim rather than the perpetrator.
That's a good point. And also another thing I've noticed too, I had a friend of mine that was in a domestic abuse situation. And one of the things that she told me was that in the beginning, it didn't start off that way. He wasn't that way. He was very kind and sweet. But she said the day after they got married and they moved away, so they moved away from her family to a state where she knew no one. She said the day after, that was when it started. Once she was away from resources that she could use and people that she could reach out to. And she said it really threw her off because it was like he was a different person. But realistically, he was that way the whole time. It's just they don't always show you who they are right at the beginning. Nia?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I come from a long history of abuse. I grew up in an abusive family. Both of my parents essentially abusive, to each other, to me, to my siblings. And so for me and for a lot of people like me, a lot of it starts with what you're taught and what is shown to you as a child, and what you see. And just seeing that, there's just so much abuse around you, it oftentimes gets instilled in you that that's what you have to accept. That's the only thing that so that becomes a comfort zone. Additionally, to touch a little bit back more on what Missy was saying, is that and what you were saying, Sabby, as well, is just that it doesn't always start that way. My therapist told me that it takes up to 6 months for someone to really show you who they really are. And oftentimes they're very good at masking who they are. They love bomb you, and they shower you with all these gifts and give you every single thing that you've never had before. And you're telling them, oh my God, I've never got this before. I've never received this before. And so it's feeding that ego that's within them. And then when they take it away from you, then that's that power that they thrive on. And I talk a lot about narcissism, narcissistic tendencies, narcissistic behaviors, and many people aren't immune to that. You know what I'm saying? Like it takes a real special person to do and inflict that type of behavior on people. But because of my upbringing, because what I experienced as a child, I went through several abusive relationships, dealt with several narcissistic tendencies, just because that's what I was taught. And when I'm, growing up and being told that I'm not going to be better than anything, and I'm a POS and all of these other things, of course I'm going to start to believe it. And then you start to accept the things that you've been told. And so I just think that there needs to be a step back and stop blaming the person for staying in a relationship, because sometimes that's the only thing that they know, or going back to that relationship because the master manipulator is good at hoovering you, showering you with all those things again, promising that they're going to change. Or look on the flip side of it, where they threaten you. They say that they're going to take their lives, or they're going to kill you and your family members, or kids that are involved. There's it's such a much bigger picture that people don't ever take a look at. They're just looking at, well, she's just dumb. She's just dumb. Like, I could never be in a relationship like that. I would never. And then you're in a situation like that, and you've been removed from everybody that you know. And now all of a sudden you're looking for help, and that's an unfortunate situation to be in. But I definitely agree with Missy with saying that the victim blaming and shaming is absolutely disgusting, and it has to stop, because you just never know. You never know the full story. And oftentimes you don't get a chance to be like me, where I made it out alive, where I was able to get away from it and realize that there's another side to this situation. So you just got to be very gentle with people and try not to be judgmental. And like Tara said, sometimes people are going to go back. I have a friend right now who's gone back several times, and you have to be patient, but you also get to set those boundaries with them as well. Like, listen, this is also taking a toll on my mental capacity and my emotional capacity as well. But people have to be way more genuine and try to be way more understanding, because there's a much bigger picture.
Christine?
So I think that the men in their circle need to step up and say something as well. My friends were in the studio, in the recording studio, and one of the producers got upset with his girlfriend, punched her, dragged her by her hair out of the studio, and fought her in the lobby. And I said to my friends, I said, hold on a second. Nobody said anything. Nobody stopped this. You're seeing this happen. And they said all of them were so shocked that they didn't say anything. And I'm just like, what is the culture around not being able to tell these men, yo, this is not okay? So if your circle is not chastising you for your behavior, then who are you going to listen to? I feel like as a culture, and especially, I don't want to just say it's one type of culture. Obviously, I grew up in hip hop culture. So there is, between the music and the, videos and all this stuff, we see things and we normalize it. Just like Tara was saying, we normalize a lot of this stuff. This is not normal. It's not okay. And it is it. And this idea of, no, you can't be a snitch. No, you can't say nothing. You got to let people deal with their own stuff. It's got to stop. Say something. Call the police on your friend. Call them out, because they need to know that it's not just the person that they're in a relationship with that it's hurting everyone else as well. But as long as you don't say anything, they're going to keep thinking that it's okay, and it's not.
That's well said. So I'm actually gonna do a follow-up question to that. The bystanders. Why does that happen? Like, why? And feel free to jump in here, because I know this wasn't one of the questions on the list, but why does that happen? Like, why do the friends or the family members, why do they not speak up? Why don't they say anything?
Because they're doing it too.
Oh.
Because they're doing it too. Like, at the end of the day, they're doing it too. You have people, especially when it comes to parents. I had my ex who literally used me as a rag doll, threw me around the room, threw me into a kitchen counter. I had his mother look me in my face and say, well, I hear some of the things that you say to him sometimes, and honestly, I'm kind of shocked that this didn't happen sooner.
Oh, wow.
Legitimately looked me dead in my face and said that. And so I think that it is, it comes down to generational trauma. I think it comes down to that, but it also comes down to, that they believe that behavior is okay. They don't see anything that's wrong with that behavior. They're also doing it, but nobody's seen them do it. And they don't want to lose the benefits that they're getting from the relationships with those people that they're with. So at the end of the day, they're not really going to say much because they don't see it as a problem, but they're closet abusers as well. So they're not going to say, they just in there chilling like, nah, you know what I'm saying? I ain't seen nothing, because they're doing the same thing too.
Also, people, they tend to go with the side of the abuser. I mean, yeah. I think we do it in politics with our politicians. We do it in our culture. We do it, and children, unfortunately, in abusive families, they'll side with the abuser because they're surviving, because they think that that's how you survive. And that's where you just mentioned generational abuse. That's the key right there. Somehow we have to stop the cycle, stop the generational cycle of abuse.
Like, if I come to you and I tell you, like, he just did this to me, and you're going to say, well, what did you do?
Yeah.
What did I do? What did I, there's nothing that I could ever do for that to ever be okay. Like, unless I go to the extreme of, say, like, maybe I shot him or something crazy like that, then I could understand. But there's nothing that I could ever do. Or if you don't have self-control to walk away, that's on you. That's not on me. But and that it's just, and to go back on what Christine was saying as well, is that because it's being so glamorized in the media, it's glorified, and no matter where you go, you could turn on the TV and you know what I'm saying? I don't know if you guys know who Ari Fletcher is. And I touched on this a couple weeks ago, saying that, oh man, I just love, I want my man to be standing at the door with a gun telling me I can't leave. Like, I like that. And you have young women and young men that are watching you, and you have millions of followers on social media, and they think that behavior is okay. And so then they go and repeat those behaviors because it's being glorified. Kanye West all over the media right now is publicly abusing Kim Kardashian.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
people are laughing at it and they think it's funny until it happens to their loved one or until it happens to them. But it is being glamorized, it's being glorified, and it's being viewed as something that's popular and it's cool to do. And it's not. It's terrifying until you have been held against your will to be able to leave the house because you want to take a drive because you guys got into a heated argument and you're being held against your will. That's not cute. Like that, that's not attractive. That there's nothing about that turns me on.
I want to get into emotional abuse because I feel that sometimes this is overlooked. And a lot of times the focus is on physical abuse or sexual abuse. And I want to open this question up to the panel. Why do you feel that women often will overlook emotional abuse or not even consider that to be abuse? And I'll go back with Steph.
You're muted, Steph.
Share that I think I want to go back to parenting, and I want to remind. I was reading some articles, and I've known this for years that if you happen to have a healthy relationship with your father, it matters for young girls. It matters in the choices that you make in the future, your romantic choices. And fortunately, my dad, I would say that my dad has a screw loose. I would say that my dad is a narcissist. I don't have a current relationship with my father. I haven't had a current relationship with my dad for over 25 years. We don't speak. But when I was a young girl, when I was a little kid, he was a good dad. He respected me. He respected my wishes. And one thing, we grew up, both of my parents are Baptist, and both of their parents were Baptist ministers. So we grew up in a church. And one of the things that my mom was very assertive about was my mom physically protected my sister and me. And she would not let anybody hold her kids or touch her kids just because they were members of the congregation. She didn't make us vulnerable to adults. She didn't turn to us and say, "Oh, go ahead and hug your uncle. Oh, go ahead and give your uncle or aunt a big kiss." We were not raised to be forced to demonstrate something physical or affectionate to strangers. So it was modeled for, when we were very young, about being sensitive to the wishes of your kids. Not pushing your little girls to kiss somebody. That set them up for abuse later. Now, as far as my dad goes, he was, solid dad. And I felt like he gave me confidence. I wasn't called a piece of shit growing up. I wasn't made fun of. So I was able to thrive as a little girl. But I'm just going to add one more thing that about resiliency. How are we giving that to our children? How are we giving, that emotional resiliency? And, you might think I'm crazy, but I really think getting your kids involved in sports when possible, that idea of competition, that idea of being on a team, that idea of building resiliency through loss or championship or whatever. And I feel like I did some sports as a young kid. I always liked, and that worked for me personally. And I think that gave me strength. And I just want to conclude with the idea of, have you ever told a friend to get out of a relationship? Are you still friends with that friend? Are you still friends with that friend that you said, get out of that? Are you crazy? He's awful or she's awful. They stop talking to you the minute they go back to that friend. So I think sometimes people hold back what they want to share with you because they're trying to either, balance their relationship with you, or, you're trying to balance it with them. And so I think it goes back again. I want to say parenting is really like, how do we raise our children to be more caring and more respectful? And, how do we remove that dynamic of emotional abuse from those relationships?
Well said.
Yeah. I think emotional abuse is often overlooked because it's a lot of the times women were framed as being dramatic, were framed as being over the top or reactionary. even to this day, I'll see men do like, oh, is she on her period? Are you having one of those days where, and it's this thing where I think automatically you don't want to be seen. I not everybody, just speaking generically, you don't necessarily always want to be seen as making a big deal out of things. And before you know it, you are being verbally abused. And then it becomes something that you think is wrong with you rather than the person doing it, because that's the point. The point is to instill doubt in who you are, and make you feel inferior, especially the people that prey on women. They tend to be narcissists, and so they know how to manipulate and how to gaslight, which is a really huge type of abuse, where there's this pretending that what they said wasn't what they meant. They didn't mean it that way. And there's also this hope that the person will change. One of my good friends was in an emotionally abusive relationship for over 4 years. And all of her friends told her, why are you with this guy? But, it took years of finding self-worth and finding the fact that, I'm not ugly. I'm not, I don't need to look different. I am capable. I am enough, in order for her to do it, because it didn't matter how many of her friends told her that the guy was awful, that she could do better. The emotional abuse kept coming, and she kept thinking he would change, and she kept not wanting to. She diminished it, because then if she diminished the abuse, then that meant it was okay and that she was handling it. So again, I go back to that factor where sometimes, especially younger women in today's society, are trying to portray this idea of strength. And sometimes in portraying that idea of strength, it's, you can't show any sort of dent in this perfectly, societal, picturesque fantasy that you've created, and you don't want to look weak. There's a shame in looking weak. Words don't hurt me, like sticks and stones may break my bones, that whole thing. But it's not about the literal words, it's about the psychological effects that it has on a person, and especially a person, who has gone through something before, who has these insecurities. And I think that's why there's really not as much attention paid, when you're like, well, some women, at least he doesn't hit me, at least he doesn't blah blah blah. So it's like it's that minimizing it, like it's not a big deal, when it actually is. And there's so much manipulation that goes into it from the person targeting you with that abuse. And so in order to break through that, there has to be a support system. And I agree with Steph that it does go back to parenting and how our relationships are with our parents, and how you raise your kids to be sensitive to how they talk to other people, not to the point where it's not, where it's superficial, but to the point where there's a level of respect there. And I think we do need to have more attention paid to that, which I go back to, well, if we had a healthcare that paid attention to mental health and interpersonal relationships, and more attention paid to that throughout school. I was lucky to go to a school where they did mediation and how to talk to people and all of these things, but most people don't get to that. Working class kids don't get that, especially in neighborhoods where there's tons of people of color, minorities. They don't, oftentimes it's the opposite. And there's just a really big absence of attention paid to that as well.
I have about 5 minutes left, and then I actually have to jump into the next stream. But I want to get through everybody. Go ahead, Christine. I see you raising your hand.
Oh, I was like, if you're going to cut off this topic, I just wanted to say something. But if you're not, then I'll let everyone else go first.
Okay, Tara.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that talking about the cycle of violence and emotional abuse, 70% of emotional abuse ends up being physical, escalating, sometimes even in death. We live in a patriarchal society in America. And when you take that patriarchy, there is an abuse and lack of respect of women embedded in the way there's relationships. And you see it all around us. You heard me tell my story on Megyn Kelly, probably about Joe Biden. The first thing he did after he assaulted me, when I pulled away from him and pushed him away, what did he say to me? He said, "You are nothing to me. You are nothing." That encapsulates, the how the attitude is towards powerful men have towards women. And I think when I worked with other domestic violence victims, they would talk about feeling like they were walking on eggshells during emotional abuse, feeling like, and feeling that tension. And then when actually there was physical abuse, it was almost a relief, because then it was over, and then it would go into the cycle of the honeymoon, where the guy would be apologizing or love bombing or doing whatever and moving on, and then it would go back to the tension and walking on eggshells. So emotional abuse sometimes is the tool leading to physical violence, and I think it's systemic in a patriarchal society.
Well said. Misty?
So I'm going to sidetrack since we're running out of time slightly. It goes along kind of with what Christine was saying about snitch culture and kind of what Steph was saying about parenting. Can we please end the respect your elders nonsense? Because that puts so many little girls in serious danger. This idea that we cannot speak out against our elders and that we can't, that sets little girls up for a world of trouble. And you should encourage your kids to speak out against anybody who is disrespectful of them and their bodies. And that has always driven me really quite insane, because I think that has done so much damage. I think that just encouraging our girls to speak out and give them the power and the the self-esteem that they need to speak up for themselves. I think that so often little girls are told to just sit there and be quiet. We don't care what you have to say. We don't care about your emotions, your opinions. And so if we can and respect your elders too, that would make me very happy.
Nia?
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I agree with you on that one completely. But I think, I don't know, for me, emotional abuse honestly was harder than the physical abuse. So I can see different takes on certain people. To me, it's just like, I can get over a bruise on my arm or, whatever physical abuse. Those words often stuck with me a lot longer than the actual physical violence did. But I think a lot of people say or see, because they didn't get hit because there wasn't a bruise or a scar, they don't necessarily see that as abuse or violent behavior either. And so that just causes a lot of people to make excuses for those situations as well. So but I to me personally, I think the verbal is a lot harder to cope with than the physical.
Christine?
So when I was 15, I had a serious boyfriend, and I was, in the church. I went to Christian school my whole life, and I was dating the pastor's son, and I thought this was great, right? I was told every day that I was stupid, that everything that I said didn't make sense. I would cry myself to sleep. I still have my diaries praying that God would kill him. And I remember being a teenager, and we were together for 5 years. I took this into adulthood. In my 20s, I was afraid to publicly speak because I can just hear, your words don't make sense. You're stupid. What are you saying? It wasn't until I actually called him in my 20s. I was like 23, I think. And I just said, you have damaged me. And he said, I know. He said, I'm so sorry. I was an angry teenager. There's no excuse for how I treated you. He said, you're not stupid. What you say does matter. And who I was as a teenager, I was a horrible person. And I can't go back and change that. Even now, knowing that boys grow up angry. And they push their anger, instead of figuring out how to deal with it, they just project their anger on the easiest target they could find. And especially, I want to talk about religion really quickly. In Christian culture, they use it as a way to manipulate. I was told that what kind of skirt are you wearing? Would God like that? They use God to sort of force you into thinking that the way that you're behaving is going to land you in hell. And so I just want to say to every single woman that is being emotionally abused, because it is true, Emotional abuse is true. What you're feeling is valid. Your words matter. You are not stupid. You are amazing. You don't deserve it. And I know that hearing this from me may not make sense, but one day you're going to look back and you're going to see that they were in the wrong and you didn't do anything to deserve it, and you don't deserve it now. You won't deserve it then. And I pray to God that you know a true love from someone that believes in you, that encourages you, and that gives you a platform to share your voice.
Period. Thank you. Period. That was amazing.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I wish we could continue this on. There's a lot of things that have been said, and I think I want to sum it up with this. Thanks so much for this, JB. It's up to us men to hold our fellow men accountable, but it's also being good fathers, brothers, uncles, and grandfathers to children.
Yes,
Thanks so much for that.
JB.
Yes.
Thank you so much. The Women's Summit does continue. Join me on the next stream. I'm going to talk to women activists. Shama Sawant will be there, as well as Medea Benjamin from Code Pink. So that should be a pretty fun time. And I do want to say to all the panelists, thank you so much for coming on and choosing to be vulnerable and sharing personal stories. I know that's not easy to do, but thank you all so much.
Thank you, Sabby. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so
Bye,
much.
guys.
Bye, everybody.
Love you, Nolly.
Bye.
Okay.